Number 10. Mindworm. Mindworm might not have been a major Spider-Man villain, but that doesn't mean that his story wasn't super dark and tragic. Mindworm was William Turner, a mutant with powerful psionic powers who was kinda like a mental energy vampire, not to be confused with Will Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean. William needed to feed on others' mental energy or he'd actually die. As a child, he accidentally killed his mother in front of his father, draining her mental energy completely. His father went into shock and died as a result of witnessing this. William would then be raised in an orphanage, studying passionately and known for his intelligence. As an adult, he fed off of his neighbor's mental energy, taking a little from each person in his area, but not enough to kill anyone. Unfortunately, Spider-Man was one of his neighbors and sensed what Mindworm was doing. Misunderstanding that William's psychic attack was for evil purposes, Spider-Man fought Mindworm and handed him over to the police. Later on, the two enemies would actually become friends. However, Mindworm would also later on once again relapse, becoming a criminal, as well as becoming severely mentally ill, in addition to being homeless. This all culminated into prompting Mindworm to give up when he was being attacked by a street gang and allow himself to be killed. So sad. Poor Mindworm. Number 9. Hammerhead. Hammerhead has a pretty dark origin story in comparison to some other villains. He and his family had left the Soviet Union when he was young, and he grew up claiming to be Italian instead of Russian, even preferring to speak Italian in his family's home. However, this would anger his father and would prompt him to beat his son with a hammer, scarring up the young boy's head. That's pretty messed up. In the end, Hammerhead managed to work his way into the Italian mob and would also end up beating Spider-Man in a fight. He was given both cybernetic enhancements, including a partial adamantium skeleton, and had his strength level increased by Mr. Negative. He also has been known to work with Black Cat when she is walking on the more villainous criminal and organized crime side of things. Hammerhead would also get revenge on his father, killing him with a large hammer. His origin could have possibly served to inspire the Daredevil Netflix series Origins for Wilson Fisk, who also killed his father with the hammer. Number 8. Vermin. Vermin was a Spider-Man villain who really only became such because of previously being abused by others throughout his life. Edward Whalen, as a young boy, was severely mistreated by his father and ended up running away because of this. He then ran into Baron Zemo and Arnim Zola and became the victim of their experiments, which transformed him into a rat-like humanoid creature. They sent Vermin on a mission to eliminate their enemy, Captain America. This conflict eventually led him to be apprehended later on by both Captain America and Spider-Man, who ran into Vermin in New York City. Vermin would also become the prey of Kraven during his last hunt, and from there would end up becoming allies with Spider-Man actually. Number 7. Sandman. Sandman has always had a kind of tragic story. He was a criminal who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and due to radioactive exposure was granted his sand shape-shifting abilities. He hasn't always been a villain and sometimes strives to become a sort of hero, though he usually ends up becoming a criminal once more in the end, tragically. He even has been known to be a sometimes friend of the Fantastic Four's Ben Grimm, aka The Thing, and Spider-Man. One dark story involving Sandman took place during one of the many times he fought Spider-Man. Spider-Man usually had creative and sometimes twisted methods when it came to how he chose to defeat Sandman. He vacuumed Sandman up at one point, tossed him into a wind turbine, and he's even set him on fire. But Spider-Man also at one point exposed Sandman to an experimental chemical substance, which caused Sandman to become insane and also caused him to become severely dirty, as dust and garbage and debris became attracted to him and entangled within him. The worst part of this was when Sandman pleaded with Spider-Man to fix him as his mental state continued to worsen and deteriorate. And initially, Spider-Man was actually a jerk and refused to help. Pretty messed up. Number 6. Hobgoblin. There has been more than one Hobgoblin over the years, but many of them have proven to be quite dark villains. Roderick Kingsley as the Hobgoblin would be the one responsible for the creation or transformation of Peter Parker's friend and Betty Grant's husband, Ned Leeds, into another version of that villain. Ned Leeds was brainwashed by the Hobgoblin and convinced to commit criminal acts, even sometimes believing that he himself was actually Roderick Kingsley, the Hobgoblin, causing him to behave extremely villainously, adopting the Hobgoblin persona for himself. When Ned Leeds was murdered, it was because Kingsley had leaked the true identity of Hobgoblin as being Leeds, causing him to be targeted and killed by the Foreigner. Number 5. Morlun. Even when Morlun is not threatening the entire existence of all of the spider totems in massive stories like Spider-Verse or Spider-Geddon, he's still pretty terrifying. Despite looking like a gothic vampire wannabe, Morlun is actually one of the Inheritors, a family of energy vampires who feed off of totems throughout the multiverse. In the story The Other, he also tormented Peter mercilessly, almost killing him at one point, beating him to death, and eating one of his eyeballs. Ew. Number 4. Kingpin. Despite the fact that Kingpin isn't one of the first people you think of when you think of dark and menacing Spider-Man villains, he's been around since the early days of Spider-Man's adventures, appearing in Spider-Man comics in the 1960s alongside many of Spider-Man's other classic villains. Wilson Fisk has always been one of the darkest, most menacing villains because of the amount of power and control that he wields. In the film Into the Spider-Verse, we saw respect paid to this character in terms of how great of a Spider-Man villain he truly is when he became the big bad of the film that Miles and his team of spider folks went up against. He was also the one responsible for killing the Peter Parker from Miles' own reality. And in the comics, he also almost killed Spider-Man's Aunt May after learning of Spider-Man's secret identity and choosing to target those Peter loved during the events of the Back in Black story. Number 3. Lizard. Lizard is one of the darkest villains on Spider-Man's roster because of how tragic his origins are. Kirk Connors basically is a victim in a monster horror story, a sort of werewolf-like scenario, but as a lizard instead of a wolf. Dr. Connors simply sought to explore the science behind possible limb regeneration, and it was his studies and exposure to an experimental serum that caused him to transform into the villain known as the Lizard. He is often presented as a villain who has no choice but to give in to his animal instincts, which is what makes him so villainous, while Connors himself really has no intention to harm others. The monster within him, however, the Lizard, often does. At one point, he transforms back into the villain known as the Lizard during a story called Shed and is tragically consumed by his animal instincts completely, which causes him to eat his own son. It doesn't get much darker than that. Number 2. Scorpion. Originally, Matt Gargan was just a private investigator hired by Jameson to uncover the secret of how exactly Peter Parker was able to get the best pictures of Spider-Man. He was later coerced into participating in an experiment wherein he was combined with the traits of a scorpion. This gave Gargan superpowers but also drove him insane, transforming him into a criminal and a villain. During Dark Reign, Matt Gargan would become Norman Osborn's Spider-Man on his Dark Avengers team, bonding with the Venom symbiote, and becoming one of the most vicious iterations of Venom to date when bonded with it. In fact, anytime Scorpion and the Venom symbiote have merged in the comics, they become a deadly villain, often going on a murderous rampage, shamelessly consuming their victims, and becoming an almost uncontrollable level of deadly. If you thought Eddie Brock's Venom was scary, no. Scorpion Venom is scary. Number 1. Jackal. Jackal, of course, is one of the darkest Spider-Man supervillains around. He was Gwen Stacy's teacher, Professor Warren, but became obsessed with Gwen and fell in love with her. When Gwen died during the battle between Green Goblin and Spider-Man, the professor blamed Spider-Man and decided he would create a clone of her and Peter Parker after learning of Spider-Man's true identity. He was the villain behind the events of Clone Saga, creating more than one clone of Peter and of Gwen Stacy. And if you thought the Scorpion was scary, Jackal was also a villain who teamed up with Scorpion and even sent him to kill Spider-Man at one point. He also kidnapped and threatened the life of people Parker cared for, such as his good friend Ned Leeds. Number 10. Tombstone. Some might think that Tombstone is some kind of zombie or Frankenstein's monster type villain just based on his look. While Lonnie Lincoln was later on mutated by exposure to a chemical, which granted him superhuman strength and durability, previous to this, he was actually just a crime boss with albinism. In fact, it was likely all the teasing that he suffered as a child due to his condition that likely encouraged him to become an indomitable criminal, filing down his teeth to appear more intimidating. His dark, grim, yet striking appearance is also a result of the time period in which he was introduced. Tombstone made his first appearance in the Web of Spider-Man series in 1988. He's definitely got a very 80s villain look. Number 9. Sauron. We've talked about the dark tragedy that is Morbius' existence, and now it's time to talk about another monster villain of Spider-Man's rogue gallery, Sauron. Carl Lycos was bit by pteranodons from the Savage Lands while on an expedition with his father. These bites would cause Carl to transform later on, causing him to need to drain the life energy of others in order to survive, basically turning him into an energy vampire. But from there, his story would only get more strange and tragic. While siphoning energy from a mutant, he underwent a further transformation, turning him into a hybrid creature, part pteranodon, part human. While Sauron was originally introduced as a villain during the X-Men comics, Spider-Man would face him during his time working alongside the mutants, both taking on Sauron and the team known as the Savage Mutates, and later fighting against Sauron with his own mutant class that he was currently leading and teaching. I love Spider-Man as a mutant teacher, I think it's super cute. Number 8. White Rabbit. You might not think of Lorena Dodson as being a very dark villain. She's just a woman after all who's obsessed with Alice in Wonderland and basically turned to a life of crime because she was bored. Her greatest power is her wealth, which allows her the gadgets and goons she needs to be a supervillain and a criminal. However, during the Absolute Carnage tie-in, Symbiote Spider-Man, we get a little side story involving a man who once wore the symbiote suit unknowingly that also features Dodson. In it, she ends up aiming to scare the man who is actually a judge that condemns her in court after being a witness to her causing a public disturbance and assaulting civilians at a local burger joint. Her scare attempt, however, results in the death of the man's son, who goes into cardiac arrest. The whole story is pretty dark. Number 7. Morbius. Morbius isn't always a Spider-Man villain, but he did start out in the comics that way. Although he is more of a neutral figure inherently, his pseudoscientific vampirism and bloodthirst often put him in the villain category, and put him in conflict with none other than Spider-Man. Which I also kind of get, considering that the first time they met, like most old school comics, they had some miscommunication which led to a fight between Morbius, the Lizard, and Spider-Man. And during the fight, everyone seemed to miraculously discover they needed the other's blood to become cured from their ailment. And so the blood wars began, and the stealing and baiting of blood would become a common trope for the sometimes villain known as Morbius. He's like a blood bandit. He loves to steal that blood. Number 6. Kaine. Kaine Parker was the broken clone that Jackal brought into the world first. His first discarded attempt at cloning Peter Parker. He's also the epitome of 90s edge and darkness with his originally dark billowing locks and tattered cape. Although not specifically a Spider-Man villain anymore, when Kaine was originally introduced he was very much a misguided rogue. Kaine is also known for his fragile psyche and unique ability known as the Mark of Cain. Many originally thought that this ability was Kaine emitting acid from his hands to burn his victims, but in reality he actually has a bunch of tiny hooks on his hands that allow him to climb, like many spider folk and actual spiders. He can use these hooks to dig into someone's flesh, making it look like he has left an acid burn when really he just dug a bunch of super tiny spider hooks into their face. Yay. Number 5. Kraven. For Kraven the Hunter, Spider-Man has always been the #1 prize. This was the inspiration for the story Kraven's Last Hunt, where it appeared that Kraven had finally captured and defeated Spider-Man by killing him. In truth, he had simply incapacitated Spider-Man, placing him in a comatose, death-like state for a few weeks. When Spider-Man awoke, he discovered that Kraven had basically been standing in for him while he was out, and it was revealed to Peter that Kraven's whole plan was to beat Spider-Man at his own game, proving that he himself was a better hero than the Spider by becoming sort of Spider-Man? In the end, Kraven felt he had accomplished what he had set out to do, and in a way also showed respect for Peter Parker's approach to heroism. Feeling that he was almost at peace with the world, Kraven took his own life, ending his legacy. Or at least this would have been a dark but meaningful end to his legacy, but instead of staying dead, Kraven would later be resurrected. Oh, comics. Number 4. Norman Osborn. Green Goblin, as he was originally known, has had a lot of different villain identities. Norman Osborn is often a criminal mastermind, and was the criminal mastermind behind the events of Dark Reign, when he was known as the leader of the Dark Avengers, Iron Patriot. He has also stepped in as a sort of alternate Carnage, believing he himself was in fact Cletus Cassidy, and has been known as the combination villain of Red Goblin as well, probably one of the most terrifying iterations we have seen of him yet as a villain. And he was also the Goblin King for a time. No relation to Madeline Pryor's Goblin Queen, by the way. But when it boils down to it, Norman Osborn is one of the darkest Spider-Man villains because he is so focused on going that extra mile just to find new and insanely twisted ways to torture Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Dude is crazy. I love it. Number 3. Kindred. This villain is pretty dark since it's been alluded to that they are a demon from hell. In life, they were someone close to Peter Parker who was betrayed by him and by Norman Osborn. They have returned to get vengeance and use demonic centipede creatures to manipulate others by having these summoned creatures crawl inside those that they wish to torment. Ick. But also not ick to house centipedes, which are lovely little creatures who feed on other house pests. We like house centipedes, but we do not like demon mind control centipedes. Yes? Except MJ maybe is a fan, as she was actually pretty nice to Kindred centipedes prior to us really knowing that they were definitely a villain out to get revenge on Peter Parker, of course. Number 2. Carnage. Sure, Kindred is a former human and current demon from hell, but Carnage is like a demon on Earth. Even disregarding the dark attachment that the Carnage symbiote had to serial killer Cletus Cassidy, Carnage recently became an even more darker villain after the Carnage symbiote appeared to die attempting to preserve Cletus during his re-entry to the Earth's atmosphere. While attempting to protect its human host, the symbiote actually burned up, and even more tragic, depending on your perspective I guess, it failed to save Cletus, who also appeared to have died on arrival. However, the Null-worshipping cult known as the Church of Darkness managed to resurrect Cletus by bonding the Grendel symbiote to him, allowing them to become a new Carnage known as Dark Carnage. Cletus was intended to be the vessel that would allow Null to awaken and return, but in order to do so he would have to collect codices from the spines of those who had previously bonded to a symbiote. I mean, dark is also in the name for this version of Carnage, but also this guy literally eats spines for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So yeah, pretty dark. Number 1. Mephisto. Of course, it can't possibly get more dark than Mephisto. When it comes to his feud with Spider-Man, or Spider-Folks for that matter, Mephisto seems to have a bit of an obsession. He saved Aunt May for Peter in exchange for his marriage to MJ, saved Miles Morales as Spider-Man's teammates in exchange for the life of a civilian that Miles had saved in that other timeline where his teammates died, and he convinced Otto Octavius as Superior Spider-Man to return to a life of villainy in order to defeat an alternate reality Spidey who was also that Earth's Norman Osborn. That's like getting rid of 2 Spider-Men with 1 stone. I like to imagine he keeps these little wins and trophies in a shrine that he has in his closet, because he is secretly the biggest Spider-Man fan ever. He even possessed Gwenpool's brother, and she's really only a small percentage related to the Spider-Verse as a sort of alternate version of Gwen Stacy mixed with Deadpool. Mephisto has revealed it's his dream to make life a living hell for all Spider-Folks everywhere. How nice. Add in the fact that he's basically Marvel's version of the devil, and you've got one twisted and dark Spider-Man villain. Possibly the most dark.
Kicking off the list at number 10, we have the Spot. Making his first appearance in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man issue 98, the Spot isn't exactly the coolest villain per se. I mean, he doesn't throw pumpkin bombs, he's not made of 1,000 spiders, but when Jonathan Owen was exposed to the spotted dimension during an experiment, his skin became white with black spots, and those spots acting as warps in space. Honestly, this character is super unique. In his second issue, you really see what he can do. He uses these portals to punch through space and hit his victims far away. He holds these portals like frisbees, and personally, I would love to see this guy fight Doctor Strange. The whole portal versus portal action alone would be mint. And they're both doctors. So why hasn't this happened yet? I don't know. Seeing Spider-Man use his portals to hit Thanos in Infinity War makes me think if the Spot was in a Spider-Man movie, it would be just hours of that, and honestly, that would be sweet. I'm here for it. I wish I was the Spot. Scratching your back would be so much easier. Instead of reaching and trying to pull your shoulders out, no thank you. Much better. And coming in at number 9, we have the 1000, aka Carl King. The 1000 made a brief but memorable appearance in the comics, beginning with Spider-Man Tangled Web number 1 back in 2001. Carl's origin story is quite compelling, as he actually witnessed Peter Parker obtain his powers by being bitten by the radioactive spider. He's clearly upset and a tad jealous. The opening of the issue has him just staring out of a cafe window, just stewing in the fact that it should have been him instead of Peter Parker to get those powers, which, you know what, I understand, man. I say that every single time I watch a Marvel movie. So, making a terrifying entrance, he reveals himself as the 1000. So So instead of getting the same powers as Peter, he actually turned into 1,000 spiders. No, I don't like that. I feel sick looking at this guy. The last page of his first issue really pulls you in. It's his skin suit, like it's his skin as a suit, just chilling on a coat hook, while he takes over Miss Peyton, even revealing that he ate her from the inside out. He's a bunch of spiders that take over your body. No wonder we didn't hear much about this guy. Yuck. Next, get out of here. And before we move on with our list, guys, if you haven't already, please toss us a like down below. It's a big help to us here at our secret underground bunker. Thank you so much. Okay, back to these crazy villains. Coming in at number 8, we have Mindworm. In Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 138, we were introduced to William Turner. No, not that William Turner, although I'm sure he'd be great. He's probably fine. I'm talking about the telepathic, tragic, minor Spider-Man villain, Mindworm. Born with limited telepathic powers, he was the cause of his parents' untimely death, and he suffered from it for quite a while. So he grew up in an orphanage and protected himself from bullies using his mind powers, thus donning the nickname Mindworm. He's extremely smart. He even looks smart too, with his big giant brain head. He attacked Peter once by hijacking the minds of others to do the dirty work, so people just started attacking him randomly. What I like most about this villain is he tries not to be a villain, for the most part at least. He just feels this tremendous guilt after being born this way. I mean, it's not his fault. And coming in at number 7, we have Swarm. Oh, you thought I was done with disgusting Swarm villains. No, think again. Fritz von Meyer made his debut in Champions issue 14 back in 1977. And as you can probably guess by his name, yes, he's made of a swarm of bees. Kind of like the 1,000, except somehow worse. He's also a scientist. So, for sure worse. Definitely worse. He used stolen gold to pay for all of his projects. So he's a Nazi beekeeper who steals gold. Great. You're a villain. You did it. So it's no surprise we haven't heard much about him. I mean, what a weird character. One day he found a beehive that was not like any other. So Fritz made a device that hoped would reawaken these bees, which he thought were like the end result of a mutation with a nearby fallen meteorite. The bees woke up, but then they continued to attack and kill Fritz, the beekeeper Fritz. No, not him. And then his consciousness was spread out through all of those bees, and now you have the swarm. Literally the bee's knees. I don't care how tough you think you are, there's no chance you're going toe to toe with bees. There's no fight. If I was swinging around the city and a swarm of bees was robbing a bank, I didn't see that. I'm just gonna keep heading to Aunt May's. No worries. Headphones are going back in. Good luck. RIP, good game. Number 6, Red Goblin. Green Goblin plus Carnage equals holy shit. Appearing in the Amazing Spider-Man 798, Norman Osborn stole the Carnage symbiote, and then after that, it was just a nightmare. So Norman used the symbiote to eject all of the nanites, but then that ended up creating this monster mash, becoming the Red Goblin. Put them both together, very scary. The rare weaknesses that the symbiotes do have went away once the two had merged, right? So if you think you can use sound or fire to take this guy out, it's your funeral, no way. Green Goblin was fine with those things, so now the Carnage side of Red Goblin isn't affected either. Even the bombs that he used are like these Carnage pumpkin bombs that will like bite you. It's all fused together and it's really intimidating. I'd love to see more of the Red Goblin, let's go. And number 5, Calypso. Making her first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man 209, Calypso is a voodoo priestess who also happens to be the lover of Kraven the Hunter. After gaining her powers from sacrificing her own sister, it's safe to say she took the villain route. So what started out as her being the significant other to Kraven the Hunter soon turned into Calypso taking over the mind of the Lizard and using him. Not cool. You can see this take shape beginning in the Torment 5-part storyline. And with rumors of Kraven the Hunter being casted in the next Spider-Man flick, who knows, maybe we'll get a little sneak peek at Calypso as well. Fingers crossed. Number 4, the Red Vulture. Okay, so we talked earlier about the Red Goblin, so we might as well throw another big red in the mix while we're here. The Red Vulture made his comic book debut in Amazing Spider-Man issue 592. And while some may see the Vulture as Adrian Toomes, the Red Vulture is actually James Natal. So James started off working for the mob, of course, and then after the workload kept increasing and increasing, he requested some help. So his superiors figured it would be a great time to use him as his test subject to make a new super bad. Using the same technology that had created the Fly and the Scorpion, but with a little hint of, memory loss thrown in there, Spider-Man found this monstrosity during a patrol, and he saw him eating a guy. He has acid spit, so it's not too hard to eat a guy. Even Peter gets some acid in his eyes. I mean, where's an emergency eye wash station when you need it? And coming in at number 3, Carrion, aka Miles Warren, made his comic book debut back in Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man issue 25. His powers are pretty amazing. I mean, I would love to see more of this guy. Everything he touches turns to dust. It turns to dust, red dust. It's very bad. He's creepy looking. I mean, he also carries this little like pouch side carry bag, so he looks creepy, but he also looks like he's running errands. So, I don't know. He's taking lives, but he's also late for work. He's a weird looking guy. The initial Carrion was actually a clone of the Jackal, but the virus had made it outlive that body. So now we're left with this. Super strength, telepathy, levitation, super speed. It's pretty hard to avoid the touch of Carrion, especially when he's motoring. This villain didn't last too long back in the late 70s, but he's interesting enough to check out. So go do that. And number 2. Morbius. We have to include Michael Morbius, the living vampire. I mean, after all, Jared Leto is set to take on the bloodthirsty mantle with a sneaky little peek at Michael Keaton's Vulture at the end of the Morbius trailer that we got earlier this awful year. A lot of people are wondering who this guy is now. Making his debut in Amazing Spider-Man 101, Michael Morbius was, of course, a scientist, and actually a Nobel Prize-winning biochemist. Having a debilitating blood disease plus experimenting with bats to find a solution, you already know what's about to go down. The best part of his origin story is that when he meets Spider-Man for the first time, this just happens to be the time where Spider-Man is donning the 4 extra arms, and it's pretty entertaining. So Morbius, in his thirst for blood, is like, oh, that dude's got 6 arms, that's like a lot of blood. Oh boy, that would be pretty yummy. So Morbius attacks and does a pretty decent job. In comes Curtis Connors to help out. Or rather, you know, turn into the lizard and make Spider-Man's day go from bad to worse. I'm pretty pumped to see Jared Leto take flight with Morbius. I mean, I'm also pretty sure Jared Leto's already a vampire to begin with, so I'm sure his method acting will really come in handy. And closing off the list, coming in at number 1, we have Tombstone, a notable villain in the Spider-Man PS4 storyline, and making his debut in the late 80s in Web of Spider-Man 36. Tombstone, aka Lonnie Lincoln, grew up bullied due to his physicality. He was born albino and much taller and stronger than others, so naturally he himself also became a bully too. See how it works? Don't bully people. There's an idea. Down the road, he embraced it and became one of the biggest, baddest hitmen out there, taking out the trash for Kingpin himself. Weighing in at almost 500 pounds and towering at the height of 6'7", Lonnie is strong enough to lift 6 tons. So if you're a fan of the Spider-Man game, you'll agree he's one of the hardest villains in that entire storyline, and for good reason.
You got some stones, Rick. Let's see if they break.
Number 10, Mindworm. Mindworm, aka William Turner, but not the William Turner from Pirates of the Caribbean, is very powerful with his mind, allowing himself to read people's thoughts, drain people's energy, and create illusions. Mindworm has a very large head and brain that he was born with. At one time, he was neighbors to Flash Thompson and Peter Parker when he moved in with Flash. Since Mindworm was always feeding off people's minds, it was no surprise that he was trying to feed off of Peter's mind as well. But since Peter's so smart, he could fight off Mindworm's attack to his mind. This upset Mindworm, and he later fought Peter, but of course he was unsuccessful and lost. Mindworm used this as an opportunity to figure out why he was even doing this, and after taking a hard look at himself, and realizing that his anger was coming from what happened to his parents, he makes peace with Peter, and he even uses his slogan, "With great power comes great responsibility." Unfortunately, Mindworm's story doesn't end great, since criminals manipulate him back to a life of crime, and he went back to prison, and afterwards he was killed by a group of people on the street. It's pretty depressing. Number 9, the Spot. So before he became the Spot, he was known as a guy named Jonathan, a scientist who was working for none other than Kingpin. Yes, so you know he has to be pretty evil working for a guy like Kingpin. Anyways, Kingpin wanted Jonathan to figure out a way to replicate Cloak's powers. Not such an easy task, as Jonathan would soon find out. Instead, he opened up a portal that sent him into a spotted dimension. I wonder if that's where he got his name from. When he was inside that dimension, his skin changed to where he had black spots all over bleached white skin. These spots were all around his entire body, and would allow him to teleport anything that he touches. He hated Spider-Man so much that he even formed a group with some of the people that will show up later on this list. Spoiler alert, one of them may be Grizzly, or maybe Kangaroo. Maybe, but you'll have to keep watching to find out if that's true. But they were part of the Spider-Man Revenge Squad. Of course, it didn't really work out for him. Number 8, the Living Brain. So the living brain was created by the character Dr. Petty, and is basically an artificial intelligence robot machine. There was nothing that the living brain couldn't solve. So when it was brought to a high school, it gave two people a pretty good idea of what they could do with this crazy robot. They had the idea to steal it and use it for whatever they would go out and gamble. They attempted to steal it, but Dr. Petty didn't want to lose his creation and fought them off and caused one of them to hit the living brain, damaging it and causing it to lose control of itself. It then turned on everyone and was on a mission to destroy, but luckily Spider-Man defeated it and saved the day. The living brain has appeared several times after this by, people either trying to use it to take down bullies or try to rob banks. The living brain was even part of the Sinister Six at one point. Number 7, Swarm. This is definitely a weird one. So are a lot of these ones on this list. So the Swarm was a Nazi scientist who survived World War II and was really into bees and poisons. He really wanted to try to make the bees he was finding very villainous and use them to his advantage. He discovered a beehive, and since he was trying to make them change their behavior, he was successful at doing that. But that is what ended up getting him killed by the bees and allowed the bees to use his consciousness and what was left of his body to become the Swarm. He has the abilities to fly and even turn as big or as small as he likes. He can also manipulate himself into different shapes. This makes it very hard for Spider-Man to fight him since really he's just a swarm of bees. He also could control not only bees but any type of insect. Number 6, LeapFrog. So LeapFrog, aka Vincent Patillo, loved to invent an assortment of just random items. He always wanted more though after every invention, and he was never really satisfied. That is, until he developed this invention so that he would be able to leap several stories in the air. He used this invention and created a suit to become the LeapFrog. This is how he began to get into the criminal world, but he didn't have the greatest success there, and there's not a lot about him. Number 5, Plant Man. Samuel Smithers was obsessed with plants and even studied them throughout his jobs. He wanted to invent a device that allowed communication between plants and humans. He had been working on this ray gun that he thought could actually make it work and create this open line of communication. It was only when it was hit by lightning when it actually got the ability to control plants. He had superhuman strength and he has the ability to communicate and control plants. After he placed Captain America in a coma with his invention Pretty Poison, he got the attention of Spider-Man, who teamed up with the Falcon to take down Plant Man and get the cure for Captain America. Number 4, Grizzly. Maxwell Markham, aka Grizzly, is quite the strange supervillain. Basically, he looks like an actual grizzly bear in this mechanical suit. His story is that he used to be a wrestler until J. Jonah Jameson ruined his career with one article, which was the reason why he lost his license to be a pro wrestler. He wanted revenge on the man who ruined his career and later attacked the Daily Bugle. Spider-Man showed up and was able to take down Grizzly and sent him straight to prison. Grizzly had super strength, durability, and super sharp claws. Number 3, Kangaroo. Before Frank Oliver became the Kangaroo, he was just some guy who loved studying kangaroo back at his home of Australia. He used to be a boxer, but he got kicked out for how he fought and really hurt one of his other opponents. When he made his way over to America, he got quite into trouble and even caught the eye of Spider-Man, since Kangaroo had stolen an armored truck. But Spider-Man was able to apprehend him. Kangaroo later got surgery by Dr. Jonas Harrow, and this is what gave him his powers where he can actually leap like a kangaroo, but a lot higher and much further. Apparently, even before his surgery, he did have kind of some abilities where he could leap more so than the average human, but not to the extent of what the surgery gave him. Number 2, Big Wheel. Jackson Wheel, aka Big Wheel, got the Tinkerer to make him this big armored wheel that would, lead him to become the Big Wheel. This all started because Rocket Racer, someone he hired to find any dirt on himself, wanted more money for something extremely bad that he found on Wheel, something that would ruin his entire job in life. He found out about the Tinkerer from Rocket Racer, which led him to the creation of the armored wheel. He attacked Rocket Racer during a fight with Spider-Man. He almost killed Rocket Racer, but Spider-Man saved him, and then Big Wheel lost control, went into the river, and was later arrested and sent to prison. But don't worry, he was back to a life of crime shortly after that. They always do. Number 1, The Wall. Yes, there was a supervillain named The Wall that has gone up against Spider-Man in the past. And a little fun story, I remember hearing about this villain a few years ago from my friend who was going back and he was reading all of the original Amazing Spider-Man issues. I remember he sent me a picture while he was reading it, and I literally could not stop laughing because his slogan was, "This is one wall you will never crawl." I mean, it's weird, but at the same time, it's kind of amazing. Like, he's definitely one of the most weird and just strange supervillains that Spider-Man has ever gone up against. Okay, so a little backstory. Joshua Waldemeier, wow, had the job of laying bricks down, and one day, an explosion happened and hit a brick wall that had just been built, sending it crashing down and burying him under all of these bricks. But didn't kill him. And actually, the bricks merged with his body, which turned him into the wall. Since he was an actual wall, Spider-Man had a hard time affecting him with any and all physical attacks. Spider-Man's web attacks didn't even work on him. But they later found themselves sitting on a bench and just working things out like two grown adults. A grown man spider and a grown man wall.